Just a little introduction to, let's say, the regulatory framework in Italy about real estate. So I think the question is, what would be the structure for an investor in Italy to use to make an investment in real estate in Italy? So let's start from the very beginning. The most common and, let's say, classical way to invest if you have a small investment used to be just set up a real estate company, so a limited company, very flexible with no specific, let's say, controls. So nothing more than a normal SPA or SRL, which is a limited company by shares or not by shares. I don't think it needs to be explained. That's very traditional, let's say. For more sophisticated investors, of course, the preferred vehicle, until today and nowadays, is to invest in an investment fund, which is a vehicle which is more sophisticated, but which has a peculiarity in Italy. It does not have so-called legal personality, meaning that it's not a legal person because it's only let's say, a kind of, if you like, investment trust. So it is managed by a company which is called SGR, which means Società di Gestione del Risparmio, so it's basically an asset management company. This big kind of vehicles is very regulated, and the let's say very peculiar thing of this kind of vehicle is that, talking about real estate funds, is that this kind of vehicle, let's say, the investor cannot very much, let's say, have an influence, not too much, about the management of the fund itself, because there is a requisite, which is the independency of the asset management company in doing the management of the fund. So I will come back to this kind of vehicle in a very short time, because I would like to make a comparison between this traditional kind of a vehicle to invest in Italy with another kind of vehicle which has not been, let's say, used very much in the last few years, since it was provided for by the law in 2007. But which has been subject to a new regulation at the end of 2014. I'm talking about the so-called SIIQ, which means basically real estate investment listed company. This kind of company, this kind of vehicle is a vehicle with legal personality, so it's different than a fund in Italy, and it's still a collective investment undertaking, as the fund, of course. And what happens is that the SIIQ raise money from the public, so in order to form the, let's say, it's the money necessary to invest, and then, buys normally the assets from other companies, from private investors, or even from funds. Let's say that the SIIQ must invest at least 2/3 of its assets into real estate-based assets, meaning that it can be real estates or in what we call rights in rem, or even in, let's say, holdings in other real estate companies. What is the structure of the ownership of an SIIQ? So a single shareholder cannot have more than 60% of the stakeholding in this kind of company. In a fund, there is no limitation for the to the maximum participation for a single stakeholder. And what is the, in terms of governance, I've already said that, I mean, an SIIQ is basically just a limited company which has opted for a specific form of regulation. So basically it is set up as a, let's say, regular SPA, so as a limited company by shares, and then opts for this kind of, let's say, corporate governance. Okay? The SIQ are subject to the supervision of the Stock Exchange Regulatory Authority, which is called CONSOB in Italy. I mean, the main difference with funds is that as regards the distribution of profits, the SIIQ are compelled to distribute at least 70% of the profits they have accrued during the year, while for the funds there is no mandatory distribution of profits during the year. About the financial leverage, the funds have a specific limitation provided by the regulatory body, which is Banca d'Italia in case of the funds, and they can only have a maximum leverage of 60% of the value which is calculated on the real estate assets owned by the fund, or real estate assets or the other rights in REM which have a real estate underlying substance. There are no specific risk concentrations rules about for SIIQ, and instead for funds there are very specific limits for diversification of risks and limitations provided by Banca d'Italia. Okay, let's talk about the reforms which have been introduced for the SIIQ regulation last year. Since 2007, SIIQ were quite, let's say, not common on the Italian market, because since 2007 there were only 2 of them, of those kind of listed companies. So basically they have not been so common in the market. The reasons may be because there were a number of limitations. One of those was the obligation for the company to distribute at least 85% of the profits. Now this limit, as I mentioned, was reduced to 70%, and with the aim of leaving more liquidity to the company to do investments, basically. Then also about the free float condition, changes have been made, because the requisite now is to have at least 25% of the capital floating, with no one having more than 2% of the holding more than 2% of the capital or the voting rights. And then there is the so-called predominance condition. An SIIQ, in order to have the possibility, have the let's say the tax advantages which are provided for the SIIQ, may have at least 80% of the whole assets invested in real estate, and at least 80% of the total income must come from assets leased. So if all these conditions are met, then the company, the SIIQ, may benefit from the very favorable taxation regime which is provided by the law. these are changes which have been introduced with the aim of, let's say, improving the use of this kind of vehicles on the market. Nowadays, I mean, these amendments to the law have been introduced in November, have come into force in November 2014. So we are still waiting to see if these changes in the law will produce, let's say, the expected benefit for the use of these companies. I think it's still early to say, but certainly this is an instrument which may help greatly to, let's say, change the regulatory context, and especially to favor the investment in the Italian real estate market. Another vehicle which I would like to mention, if I have time, are basically a vehicle which has been introduced in the first half of 2014, which is called CCAF. CCAF means basically real estate investment company with fixed capital. This is a kind of regulated entity, so it's different. It's a non-listed, basically non-listed company, and may be used for real estate investments. And basically, when certain requirements are met, which basically means that 2/3 of the overall assets of the company are invested in real estate, then the company will benefit from the same taxation which is applied to to traditional investment funds, which means basically no income tax and the possibility of to be applied the same VAT regime of investment funds, which means that VAT used basically in real estate, in the real estate management of the company is completely tax deductible. Then the distributed profits are only subject to a 26% withholding tax, which might be, in certain cases, is a withholding, in certain cases, depending on the, let's say, of the entity which takes the profits, may even be the final taxation. Let's say that this kind of vehicle, as I said, is a regulated vehicle. The advantage for this vehicle is that it's much more flexible than an investment funds, because allows the investor, because it's a, let's say, from a corporate governance point of view, is basically a normal limited company. Of course, it's regulated, so there are specific rules, but I mean, it's a company with legal personality, so there is no, basically, the cut which there is in investment funds between the investor and the management of the company. This in general applies, let's say, to the regulatory environment, so the kind of vehicles which can be used in Italy to invest in real estate. I think it was to say that among the various, let's say, regulatory changes which have been introduced last year, in particular with a decree which was called Unblock Italy's Blocca Italia in November last year, there has been a quite interesting change in the legislation regarding real estate leases. As you may know, real estate leases are regulated in Italy by a law which dates back to 1978, which used to be a very protective law for tenants and much less for lessors, for landlords. In particular, let's say, it used to be a law very with a very low rate of flexibility, meaning that for example, the duration, the term of leases was fixed at least for the first term, which used to be not less than 6 years, and 9 years for hotels and this kind of businesses. And limitations that were on the indexation of the rent, for example, and also in relation to retail properties, to retail rents, there were certain provisions regarding some indemnities to be paid at the end of the lease to the tenant. And then there was an issue, a provision which was quite, let's say, which normally scared the investor, in particular foreign investor, which was the so-called right of withdrawal for the tenant. So in case of just reasons, or justified reasons, sorry, or just cause, with a 6 months notice to the landlord. So basically, in certain cases, which substantially were in case, for example, of financial crisis of the company, but also of the tenant, but also in case, for example, the tenant had development in its business, and, for example, it needed to have more areas to run the business, so more space. Then, in that case, when certain other conditions were met, the tenant had the right to withdraw, to come out from the premises, basically, to go out from the premises and to leave them, with just 6 months of notice to the landlord. This issue was seen as a big problem because it did not allow the landlords, especially in case of new developments, to make, let's say, a safe business plan and to predict if the money which was provided in the lease agreement as rent would have ever come to the landlord. All these provisions now have become, let's say, can be waived by the parties when the rent provided for by the lease is higher than 250,000 euro per year. This law, this amendment to the law does not apply, let's say, automatically, but only applies, so the various provisions of the law, of the previous law, continue to apply unless they are derogated by the parties expressly. So every time the parties want to derogate a provision, including the one about justified reasons, about the minimum duration, about the indexation, and about all the other, the indemnities, etc., so they have to be derogated expressly. Then there are discussions about how the 250,000 euro threshold must be interpreted, if it is the stabilized rent, or can even be the first year rent, or given that 250 euros are measured on a year term, if this means that the lease must have a term of at least 1 year, or can be less than 1 year, but in that case, the proportion of the rent on the, let's say, shorter duration must be the same as 250,000 euro per year. So there are still discussions about that. But this is certainly a very interesting instrument which should, let's say, allow Italy to be a more normal country regarding commercial leases. So basically where tenant and landlord may agree all the terms, quite freely, let's say, all the terms and conditions of the lease without any specific, let's say, obligations as to the minimum duration and so on. So basically, putting together this reforms, there are others, but there is no time to mention. I think that now we have Italy has some instruments in order to be considered as a more, from this point of view, more international place to do real estate business. Then, of course, that is not the only requisite in order to attract foreign investors, of course, but at least we have the opportunity to do it, and I think that the next few months will demonstrate that these changes in the law are appreciated by the investors, and together, of course, with the improving of the economical situation of Italy, which probably is certainly still the main driver in order to attract foreign investments.